The world remembers Diane Keaton as the fearless icon who appeared to choose a life unbound by convention. We know the laughter, the hats, the singular luminous spirit. But what if that legendary freedom was a mask she was forced to wear? What if the woman Hollywood adored for her defiant self-possession was for decades wrestling a devastating kind of loneliness she couldn't outrun, even at the peak of her fame? Behind the signature, slightly self-deprecating smile lay a deeply unsettling truth. Keaton's greatest heartbreak wasn't a career failure, but a profound, life-altering sense of loss tied to the three titans who loved her and then left her emotionally exposed. This is the story of the unspoken vows she broke, the ultimatum that changed her life, and the shocking act of rebellion she undertook to finally silence the whispers of tragedy. The architect of anxiety. Long before the fame, the awards, and the red carpet, Keaton was a child drowning in the quiet silence of a house where emotions were hidden behind polite smiles. She grew up beneath the deceptive glow of Hollywood's golden skies, watching her mother's stage dreams dim into domestic duty, a powerful, unspoken warning that shaped every choice she made. That quiet verdict, the crippling fear of fading away, was her constant companion. It was this fear that fueled her desperate escape to New York, where she lived off borrowed courage and cold coffee, often sleeping in her coat against the merciless Manhattan winter. Her initial success didn't come from a confident performance. It came from the raw, painful truth of her own vulnerability, a truth she wasn't acting, but simply living. Acting wasn't a choice, it was survival. She famously confessed that she built myself out of fear, making her anxiety the very core of her lucrative art. And it was this hidden anxiety, this trembling fragility, that first attracted Woody Allen. Theirs was less a conventional romance and more an intense, almost incestuous psychological partnership that became the blueprint for her entire career. Allen didn't just cast her, he meticulously unpacked her deepest insecurities, demanding she show the anxious child who hid her feelings and the woman who struggled to be seen, pouring that raw, unfiltered anxiety straight onto the screen. Their love was a brilliant, dizzying dance between creator and muse, fueled by endless late-night conversations and a shared genius that terrified them both. Their life was the stage, their relationship the script. It was a partnership so all-consuming that when she finally stepped away, it didn't feel like a simple breakup. It felt like ripping out a vital organ. But Keaton, who had just spent years turning her own neuroses into box office gold, realized she needed a love that didn't demand she be a character. She yearned for a partner who saw the woman beneath the turtleneck, not the performance. It was a shattering decision, but a necessary exit, clearing the stage for the man who would truly break her resolve. She walked away from the blueprint, only to find herself walking straight into a hurricane. But her greatest challenge, a turbulent, addictive love she couldn't walk away from, was waiting just around the corner. Every icon has an unfulfilled narrative, and for Diane Keaton, it was Al Pacino. Their chemistry on and off screen was palpable, a live wire running through the Corleone family, and in real life, their bond was an emotional addiction that lasted decades, an on-again, off-again saga the tabloids could never pin down. Pacino was, by her own admission, the most difficult man to talk to, a figure whose intensity and emotional distance perfectly mirrored her own hidden anxieties and her father's rigid silence. They were the perfect co-stars, but tragically poor partners, constantly oscillating between profound intimacy and dramatic withdrawal. Keaton chased the ghost of stability in his presence, drawn to his brilliance and his struggle. But their relationship was a constant storm of emotional withdrawal and magnetic pull. The real drama, the true heartbreak that defined her life, came years later, after her affair with Hollywood playboy Warren Beatty failed, an affair she later described as a chaotic escape. When she returned, she realized Pacino was still the center of her gravity. Keaton, desperate for the sense of permanence her childhood never gave her, reportedly gave him an ultimatum that changed everything. Marry her and commit, or lose her for good. She called him the love of her life, the man she had waited for through 3 separate decades. His answer, his shocking refusal to commit to the deep, silent intimacy she craved, left her emotionally exposed and adrift. It wasn't a rejection of her, but a rejection of permanence. It was the moment she was forced to accept a truth more painful than any rejection slip, that a man could love her completely and still refuse to choose her forever. She was devastated, forced to accept the loss of the life she'd silently planned. The silence that had followed her since childhood had finally settled over her future. The tragic label and the shocking act of rebellion. In the aftermath of Pacino's final word, Keaton was haunted by the insidious title the tabloids gave her, the lonely spinster, the brilliant woman too strange, too difficult to be chosen. The media relentlessly reduced her profound internal struggle to a simplistic tragedy, a sad footnote to her glamorous career. They whispered that her refusal to marry was not a courageous choice, but a failure to secure a man. They implied her life was somehow incomplete. This external scrutiny became the final external foe she needed to conquer. But in an explosive, silent act of defiance that stunned Hollywood, Keaton delivered her answer not with words, but with a life-changing choice. At the age of 50, an age when Hollywood was already trying to push her aside and define her as past her prime, she decided to adopt her daughter, Dexter, and later her son, Duke. It was a stunning pivot, a clear, unambiguous rejection of the idea that a woman's life is defined by a husband or a timeline. It was a shocking move on Hollywood's rigid schedule, and it demanded a kind of primal courage she hadn't needed even for the most demanding scenes. She didn't seek a partner, she created a family entirely on her own terms, proving that she was fully capable of profound, unwavering love outside the accepted narrative. This wasn't a consolation prize, it was a radical reclamation of her destiny, a definitive one-woman rejection of the tragedy narrative. She had spent a lifetime running from the silence, only to fill it with the sound of children's laughter. But as she carved out this new, fiercely private life, the world began to wonder where the icon had quietly vanished. The unprinted diary and the unseen ending. As her adopted children grew, Keaton began her quiet withdrawal from the relentless demands of the public eye. Her career slowed, not from a lack of offers, but from a profound and deliberate shift in focus. She traded the white-hot glare of the spotlight for the sun-drenched solitude of the desert. The competitive noise of Hollywood was replaced by the silence of Palm Springs. In those final, fiercely private years, she became obsessed with analog photography, carrying her camera everywhere, capturing moments only she would ever see. The people closest to her later shared details of her final, silent diary. Thousands of unprinted, unnamed photographs, each frame a quiet study of a small miracle, a shadow, a fleeting light captured forever. They weren't meant for a gallery, they were for her. It was as if, after a lifetime of performances designed for others, she finally understood that the real art was simply seeing and existing without the need for applause. She was creating a final, hidden inventory of her world. Her exit from the world was as fiercely private as her children's lives, a final, deliberate choice to leave behind a diary that only she could truly read, a record of a life lived for herself. Diane Keaton's life was not a tragedy, but a searing document of a woman who was constantly fighting to be real in a world obsessed with illusion. She was a master of self-sabotage and profound vulnerability, transforming her deepest fears of being unloved, unseen, and alone into the art that made her immortal. She didn't end up with a husband, but she created an entirely new definition of a successful life, proving that the greatest love story a woman can write is the one she writes for herself. She took the silence that had terrified her as a child, and in the end, she taught it to listen. Her legacy is not just in the Oscars she won, but in the audacity of her own ending. A final, quiet triumph over the fear that haunted her. She showed us that the greatest form of courage isn't finding a partner, but daring to be your own center of gravity. Will the world ever truly understand the profound cost of her courage? Or will the seductive myth of the lonely icon remain her final, haunting curtain call,